tēnā koutou katoa, i ngā tangata te riti, nau mai, haere mai, ki tēnei hui. Tēnei mātou, ngā kaimahi o te kaunihira taio ki Waitaha, ngā pāngo, ngā whiaro ka oti te mahi. Bill Greg Burns, tēnei. Councillor Davies, will you do the karakia, please?
Ka haia te ata, ka hapara te ata, ka koroki te manu, ka wairori te kutu, o te ata nui, ka wharaina, ka taki te umare, he pō, he ao, ka awatea.
Well done. Thank you, Councillor Davies. Good morning. Welcome to the meeting. I've been informed there is a quorum present and I'm pleased to declare the meeting open. Do we have any apologies? Councillor Robinson is likely to, maybe for lateness, is hoping to attend online. Councillor Diche as well. Doesn't appear to be online, but it's told out hope given the time frame for that. Hilda? Conflicts of interest? Does anyone have anything they would like to confess now? No, thank you. There are no public forum deputations or petitions. There is no extraordinary or urgent business. Neither are there any notices of motion. Morena, Councillor Robinson.
Morena, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you. And it's lovely to see you there.
Thank you. It's snowing in Dunedin.
Right, let's go to item 7, minutes, unconfirmed minutes of the Biodiversity Security meeting of the 8th of March 2023. Are there any matters of accuracy relating to the minutes of this meeting day? Thank you. Can I have a mover to confirm the minutes from the Biodiversity and Biosecurity Committee meeting held 8th March 2023? Thank you, Councillor Ward. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Cranwell. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? No? So carried. Thank you. Go to item 8, which is the Biodiversity and Biosecurity Committee Resolution Status Report. I have the Director of Strategy and Planning, Catherine, here to introduce the report. Can you please come to the table?
Thank you, Chair. And I will just take the resolutions report as read. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Councillor Swiggs.
Yeah, just note that there's in here there's a resolution tracking a resolution to go into public excluded. I think it's a little bit of overkill to just report those. It's really tracking our work, not really procedural motions, I suppose. Is that?
Certainly, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Swiggs. Do you have any other questions or clarification before? Can I put the motion then?
Yeah, I don't want to take exception to what you've said, Councillor Swiggs, but I just wonder whether for visibility it shouldn't be noted, or do you think it's noted in the minutes? Okay. So I can't have a grant.
Thank you for that, Councillor Scott. Chair Scott. So can I get someone to move the recommendations, please? One notes that the National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity has been released and will come into force on the 4th of August 2023. 2 notes that the impacts on work already underway to do. Oh, sorry. Sorry, just trying to move through there very quickly. Apologies for that. I was thinking, yeah, oh, yeah, killed up. Don't worry. I haven't got my glasses on either. That's the other thing. Let's go back. Thank you. Shall we? Do I have a mover that notes the status of the previous resolutions provided in the Status of Biodiversity and Biosecurity Committee Resolutions Report, August 2023? Thank you, Councillor Swiggs. Do I have someone to second that? Thank you, Councillor Scott. Okay. So no discussion on that. All those in favour say aye. All those against? Nay. Carried. Thank you. Now, 8.2. We're going to have someone from the staff come up to the table, please. Yep. Could I have Alex come to the table, please? Morena, good to see you. Kia ora. I'll hand this to you, Alex, and thank you for being here.
Kia ora all. I've just got a little bit by way of introduction and perhaps some additional information to supplement this report. As noted in the report here, on the 7th of July this year, government released its national policy statement for Indigenous biodiversity, which will come into force later this week on the 4th of August. I suppose the report prepared to meet the committee timeframe on a relatively short window. So since I've written that report, we've probably done a bit more analysis. And while I'll take the content of the report as read, I might supplement it with just a bit more information for you all now. I've broken that down into a bit more analysis under some of the key changes that we've seen from earlier versions of the NPS to now. Some reflections on the submission that Environment Canterbury made and that the regional sector as a whole made and where that aligns with the NPS. Some of the work that's happened since we've prepared this paper and some sort of next steps / implementation issues and questions that we'll need to consider. So apologies if this is a bit drier than my normal sort of work on this committee, but it's a bit of a long list of provisions and those sorts of things. So bear with me, and then I'll throw to the floor for questions afterwards. So I'll kick off with some of the key changes we've seen from earlier versions of the NPS for Indigenous biodiversity, noting that it's been sort of kicking around the traps for a couple of decades now in various different iterations. So it's had a lot of changes. This analysis relates to the changes that we've seen between the exposure draft, which is the last publicly available version we saw, and the current NPS for Indigenous biodiversity, the one that will come into force later this week. One of the most significant changes is the sort of elevation of the maintenance of Indigenous biodiversity as a key priority within the national policy statement. It now is sort of backed up by its own clause, and it's it's more or less the purpose of the NPS to maintain Indigenous biodiversity. At the same time, there's been a de-elevation of some of the other language in there about protection and restoration. They've been de-emphasised somewhat. The earlier versions of the NPS contained elements that were described as fundamental concepts. They're no longer part of this NPS, but some of those elements have been retained in slightly different ways. This includes, for example, earlier versions including some guidance that was called Tarito Te Harakiki. I think that was the earlier NPS's attempt to do something in much the same way as Te Mana o Te Wai is implemented through the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, but has obviously decided that it wasn't quite hitting the mark in the finally released NPS. So rather than retaining that guiding principle, those sorts of elements have been asked to be considered in slightly different ways, including by reference to the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi as decision-making principles. There's also some effects management hierarchy instruction that sits within the interpretation element of the NPS. So how to apply for resource consents and the like effects management to implementing the NPS now in our day-to-day work. There is a new policy in the NPS, and that describes that Indigenous biodiversity is to be managed in a way that gives effect to the decision-making principles of the NPSIB and takes into account the principles of Waitangi. So There are some quite significant exclusions for renewable energy generation and transmission network assets from the NPSIB. So those, I guess, are being prioritised a little bit more than they had been previously as key bits of work. There's a much more enabling framework in the NPS for those types of activities than there was previously. Also, recognition of the role of Indigenous biodiversity in mitigating the effects of climate change. Another significant change is that there's a requirement for local authorities to consider requiring conditions for restoration and enhancement of Indigenous biodiversity on consents or new delegations. And finally, a whole suite of editorial changes we've put forward to clarify meanings and interpretations of the requirements. Other than that, largely the substance of that document is the same as the earlier versions that we'd seen. How that tracks against some of the matters that were submitted on in the regional sector and from Environment Canterbury, I'll detail now. So we'd requested in a few instances that there be additional transitional provisions to get us from the current lack of policy direction into a world where we now are operating under it, and those really haven't been taken up in the way that we requested. I think there's probably still a bit of a lack of clarity on some of the roles and responsibilities contained in there, which was another thing that we asked for. Another sort of significant thing that was a feature of our submission was that there's no longer much flexibility for regional councils who are currently or may choose to in future manage SNAs and other areas of Indigenous biodiversity as a regional council function. So some of those functions are entrenched within the territorial authority framework now, removing the decision-making capabilities from a regional council to elect to take on some of that work. Also, there seems to be a bit of a gap between the recognition and protection of areas that may be known to be SNAs but have not yet been listed or mapped in a district plan. So I guess we need to sort of do a bit more thinking about how that might work, because we're still required under the Resource Management Act to identify areas of significant Indigenous vegetation, and I guess there may be an implementation challenge where those may not have been recorded yet in district plans, and noting that it could be a relatively long time frame, up to 10 years, for that to actually occur. There's other submission points that relate more to the regional sector submission about the adverse effects of SNAs that sit within plantation forestries, as well as some of the ongoing implementation challenges, and those in brief are matters specifically about the access to suitably qualified experts to undertake assessments, and how well the sector is, the local government sector as a whole, is positioned to begin implementing this in the timeframes that are required, understanding that there's some big work in there. So what's gone on at ECAN a little bit since this paper was created? With just, I guess, ongoing analysis of some of the provisions and the implications, hence some of my updates to you right now. And that's not just from the strategy team where I sit, but across other parts of the business, including some advice notes being prepared for our consenting teams who may need to consider this from the fourth, as well as sort of a bit of early analysis from some of our ecology science teams and operational biodiversity delivery teams. So I guess some early discussion about the requirements that are contained therein with the Canterbury Biodiversity Champions group, which is a collective of a governor from each of the territorial authorities and includes Councillor Pauling representing ECAN. They just had a very early discussion about what sort of opportunities there might be to share the load, share approaches, and work together constructively, to knowing that we all have to work together to implement that NPS. There's also a meeting coming up that I'll be talking to the TA biodiversity staff about similar things. Next steps, I guess, I think there's probably quite a bit that needs to happen to have this fully implemented, and as I've indicated already, quite long timeframes to get us there for some of these things. So I don't necessarily think I'm panicking yet to do some of the specific things, although I do acknowledge that there's some big impacts and influences that are going to pop out of this NPS. So we'll need to continue to update, communicate with you as councillors on the requirements of the NPS and what it might mean for our regional council and what it might mean for our future planning, long-term or otherwise. We will need to work closely with Tangata Whenua as partners to determine the extent they wish to be involved in giving effect to NPSIB requirements. there's a whole heap of mandatory direction contained in the NPS about the sorts of questions that and working to get opportunities to work together that we will need to consider, but potentially opportunities beyond that as well. We'll have to ensure that our planning processes are properly integrating NPS IB requirements, and I would use that to describe the sort of extent of the regulatory framework from our regional plans at such time as they are updated, all the way through to what might need to happen on the ground now, as I've talked about consenting and compliance type work. We'll have to work closely with the territorial authorities in the region to understand what we can do together and what support and we might need to offer them. There's some clear instruction in the NPS about our role in supporting the identification of SNAs, for example, if we're asked to do so. There's also need to develop some internal implementation plans that will support our staff to understand those implementation requirements and ensuring our sort of biodiversity work programs are aligned with the requirements of the NPS in future. Also, work that is already underway that we'll need to continue with, and the two prime examples of that are the things that this council or previous version of this council saw coming when we'd seen earlier versions of the NPS, and in particular those are the Canterbury Biodiversity Strategy revitalisation and the development of a regional biodiversity monitoring plan, and I know those are matters of particular interest to this council. And then finally, we'll probably need to turn our minds to developing any material that might be required to support the community at large in terms of understanding the NPS and its implications on them. So there's probably there's a bit of work. There's big timeframes that we've got, but there's lots to do. So with that diatribe over, I will now open to questions if any of you have.
I've got a couple of questions. The first one being, so the NPS obviously informs the regional policy statement, which we're working on at the moment. Is there a piece of work going on to integrate that into the planning framework we have now? That's my first question, because it would seem to me that's the best opportunity to be directive.
I can't speak 100% for the planning team, but yes, the development of the regional policy statement is very aware that this is live, and it's excellent timing for it to adopt what's needed to as part of that process.
Yeah, just to comment on that for our next question. The significance of that, I guess, is that it's an extra piece that we didn't see coming when we started going through this process, but it also is a big opportunity because the SNA work needs to be done because some people are doing it, some people aren't. And then that we've got an opportunity now with Mana Whenua we're engaging, and maybe that's maybe not an add-on, but maybe that's a bit that we can push out to. And I know Craig probably got some ideas on that. So that's a comment. And then the third thing is, does this look to reprioritise some of the stuff that we're doing?
I think we should take it as an opportunity to do that assessment and make sure that the work we are doing is aligned where we can be, or at least not working counter. So I think, yeah, we'll be certainly looking at what it might mean. We don't want to be doing anything illegal, for example. Does that make sense? Yeah, yeah.
Councillor Surfworth.
Thank you. You mentioned that there's parts of what we might have done as the regional council that's now really specifically with the district councils. And I'm just wondering, would there be an opportunity for them to contract? I mean, I think the reason why we put that was because we felt like we had particular expertise and it made sense to come some of that work to be with us. But presumably we could be contracted by them to do that work.
Oh, sorry, I'll cut you off there. I can explain that submission point a bit better if that's helpful. So under a framework before the NPS, a regional council could allocate roles and responsibilities for managing terrestrial biodiversity through its regional policy statement. Traditionally, across most of the country, some of those specific roles have been delegated out to territorial authorities to manage. We are now limited in what we could. Sorry, other way around. We also could have made the choice to retain those functions. Now, for some of those functions, we can't do that. They are nested in as roles specific to territorial authorities under the NPS. And that will be an interesting challenge for those councils, regional councils that do manage those elements of terrestrial biodiversity already. Yeah.
Presumably we would, if we are able to support in some way, then we would, but In terms of the terrestrial biodiversity you just mentioned there, I'm just interested to know, we have under paragraph 27 in the paper, it mentions about monitoring plan focused on terrestrial biodiversity. Now, I know we've sort of talked about having a specific role in terms of biodiversity with relation to freshwater habitats. And so terrestrial can mean the other stuff on land. And then we've got coastal. I'm just wondering, what do we mean? What's that saying in real terms? Like what are we talking about there? And when we talk terrestrial biodiversity in context of that paragraph 27.
So we had quite early indicators that the NPS IB would apply only to the terrestrial environment. So the function for scoping up what a regional biodiversity monitoring plan might look like has largely been the remit of our land ecology team. So the dry bits, largely. I also wonder if it might be helpful to answer that question to sort of reflect on the definition of terrestrial environment that the NPS provides. And that means land and associated natural and physical resources above mean high water springs, excluding land covered by water bodies and freshwater ecosystems, as those terms are used in the NPS FM 2020 and the coastal marine area. So the scope of the NPS IB is reasonably limited, but the role of a regional council is still broader than just what it suggests in there. Deliver on the elements of the NPS IB, we will have to do those matters that relate to the terrestrial environment. There may be a decision for this council that it wishes to do more or expand the remit and that sort of thing. There's nothing that says we can't do that, but to deliver on NPS IB requirements, our focus will be on the terrestrial environment. So if I was going to provide advice about how you prioritise it, it would probably be that you focus on that in the first instance, building other. But again, that would require some conversations with all of you.
Oh, sorry. Can I a supplementary here?
Kia ora, Alex. So just that definition, so not rivers, not lakes. What about wetlands? Because wetlands are specifically mentioned in here. So where does wetlands fit?
In limited contexts, I think wetlands will be included. I think there's some natural inland wetland wording in there. I'm not 100% sure how that will work. There'll also be some inherent conflicts with, well, not necessarily conflicts, but some sort of implementation challenges where we're being asked to manage highly mobile fauna, for instance, and not all of them choose to stay solely in terrestrial environments as defined by this at all times. So yeah.
Yeah, I have another question, but just that, yeah, your last comment there, of course, they all merge, move around. At times terrestrial will be underwater and wet, and that's growing, and so yeah, it's hopefully with the NPS freshwater and the IB, I mean, they should hopefully totally integrate and overlap, so we're across it all. The final question I had was just around budgets and so on. So we had to pause on bits of work and defer them because of this not being released as soon as we'd expected. So has there been money put aside for this, or have we anticipated enough that there was going to be this coming and got the budgets in there? I'm just thinking about paragraph 32, and it sort of implies we may be going to have to be juggling with some of our other work now. So does that sort of suggest we've just finished our annual plan and now we're already rethinking to some extent? So how's that? What's the story there?
So the primary budget item that refers to is some of the work that we deferred, the goods and services relating to the Canterbury Biodiversity Strategy revitalisation. That have been identified as savings in previous annual plans, so it hasn't been set aside to continue to deliver this in future. That said, I think we can probably handle a large amount with staff time to support some of that process, but it may be, yes, something that we need to consider into future. But I think it was somewhere in the region of, in total, it would have been over $400,000 in savings that were identified over a couple of year periods. So, yeah.
Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A number of sort of specific questions, but in terms of 14C, where it says you've got to have at least 10% Indigenous vegetation cover in urban as well as rural areas. Does that apply to individual property owners, or is that done on a district council basis, or is it what's the land area, and also what do they mean by Indigenous vegetation in terms of urban environment, and what are the timeframes for that?
I'll start at the end. I think it's a target. So it's a progressive time frame, like with the idea that you get there eventually, and that's the you design your system to enable you to support getting to that target. I don't think there's a specific. Maybe someone else can in the back.
So no sanctions if you don't reach that target.
I guess not, I suppose, but the other elements of your question, I'll caveat that. I would very much like to take some other advice before I confirm a specific answer to that question. The other elements of your question, I believe it's at broad scale, so I don't believe that it specifies on an individual property basis that you are required to do that, but in areas that are identified as urban areas as a collective and in rural areas as a collective, those are the targets that apply.
In 15F, when it talks about adopting a precautionary approach to proposed activities where effects on Indigenous biodiversity are uncertain, does that mean if you don't know, you can't do anything?
That may delve into some planning advice that I don't know how quickly I am to answer, but generally speaking, being precautionary means doing a lot less. So if you're unsure of the effects or impacts, then you probably shouldn't be agreeing to for progressive resource consent, for example.
And I've got just two more brief ones. One is 0.6 of that, same 15.6, versus work in partnership with tangata whenua and owners of space. Is this proposing a different regime for Maori-owned land from other privately owned or communally owned land?
Yes, there are some specific different requirements for Māori land than there are for other parts of land.
This is specifically what's defined as Maori owned, not land owned by Maoris, but Maori owned land, which is, as I understand, two different things. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
And then my last question really is about, and it's a combination of 4 and 7, where you're talking about managing Indigenous biodiversity outside of SNAs and then also managing this highly mobile fauna areas. And I'm conscious of, I was in California a few years ago and I saw this beautiful bird on the side of the track as the chappie was driving us around state-owned, it was owned by the state of California. And I said, what's that lovely bird? It is a crane of some description. It's big, tall, like a heron, but colourful. He said it's a dead bird. And about 2 minutes later, he radioed up and got one of his staff members to shoot it because it was a migrating bird and they didn't want to have any migrating birds on their property because then they became subject to having to look after the properties for migrating birds. So are we in danger of this highly mobile fauna thing outside of SNAs creating an excuse for people to actually wipe out the we have a colony of white-faced herons that live in our their preferred tree is a macrocarpa. If we were to mill those macrocarpa for firewood, will we get into now trouble with the regional council for destroying highly mobile fauna habitat?
Excuse me, Councillor McKenzie, is there actually a question in there?
Will landowners, how are we going to define this? And will landowners who have habitat, which is not Indigenous, but is clearly used by native fauna for habitation, get into trouble if they cut down the wrong tree for say
as just dejected over here? Yes. I mean, if it's a piece of habitat captured by the content of this NPS, then whether it's significant or whether it's other habitats of Indigenous vegetation, and yes, there are controls that apply. Your other question about the unintended consequences of sort of species management, typically that's not the role of or function of a regional council's. Indigenous fauna species tend to be managed by the Department of Conservation and other places. They're protected by things like the Wildlife Act and various other bits of legislation. So I'd rather hope that people aren't treating this as an excuse to do things that might run contrary to either other bits of legislation that are.
Kia ora, thank you. Councillor Edge.
Thanks, Alex, for that summary of all the stuff that we've got to do and all that analysis that you've got to do. Just a few questions from me. It is, well, and a clarification really. On page 19, 14C, just picking up on that 10% target. I suppose that's a minimum, was describing it as a minimum target. And we know, for example, in Waimakariri, there's only 10% of Indigenous vegetation left. So that figure's already there for that. So is there an opportunity in the long-term plan for us to set a different target that's more progressive and more, a better outcome?
This is a requirement for regional planning instruments. So I guess the part of LTP development, you can set outcomes for all sorts of different things. It could apply there, but this is specifically directing it as part of Resource Management Act plans. So it will be a minimum target, as you've indicated. That does not mean that it excludes this council from trying to set a target that's more ambitious. And I think that's some additional wording in there that if it's not at 10%, then you have to have a target at 10% at a minimum. If it is already there, then you want to be more ambitious, then you can have to have a conversation about whether or not that's appropriate. So yes, live decision making, probably decision making that will have to go through Te Raupatuia and the regional planning process, though. Yeah.
Next question is related to the Canterbury Biodiversity Strategy. I know you mentioned that there's some work going on with the Champions group. The Biodiversity Strategy 2008 involved a whole lot of other stakeholders. So are you anticipating that at some point reasonably soon, in order to meet the ongoing review of that, that you may re-engage with those people who participated in that first one?
Short answer is yes. Slightly longer answer is that there's direction to that effect in the NPS itself. So absolutely, yeah.
Final questions related to the production or assessment of SNAs, and a conversation that the Kaikoura Zone Committee on Friday, two issues were raised. One of them was the potential cost and resourcing for smaller councils. Just picking up on Councillor Southworth's suggestion that perhaps Environment Canterbury could, like the Canterbury Biodiversity Strategy, is a Mayoral Forum-led exercise. Do you think that the mapping is the main issue, potentially on a consistency in the mapping? Is that something that could be consistently prepared by the regional council with the agreement of the Mayoral Forum, for example?
So I'll start with the requirements of the NPS itself, which are each territorial authority has to undertake a district-wide assessment of the SNAs in its district. Where the regional council hook is that if those territorial authorities ask us to, we are obliged to help them with that sort of district-wide, I guess you'd call it like almost a desktop assessment of what that might look like. There's other responsibilities down the line about ground truthing, all of that other things, and that's where the big implementation challenge comes. I think my advice as sort of an advisor to this council would be that if we can do a regionally consistent approach and have the TAs through the Mayoral Forum ask us as a collective to do that work, it would probably provide us an opportunity to deliver a regionally consistent approach to that desktop assessment and hopefully set up the TAs to do their work on a better time frame. But obviously that's advice, not my decision to make. So we could work with councils to progress that conversation to the Mayoral Forum if that's what you'd like us to do.
Sorry, last question. At that meeting too, one of the community members mentioned that he thought that it would be good to have a summary of this communicated to especially our rural sector and farmers, so that because there's some good things in the document, and is that something that you're potentially looking at?
I haven't turned my mind to the specifics of that, aside from identifying the communication that we need to do with the community at large as a sort of key aspect of implementing this. I'm in the back of my mind, I'm pretty sure that there's some guidance from the ministry for some sectors. I'd have to double check that though, but there might be some summary information already available. What that means in the regional context is something that we'll need to figure out.
Got it, thank you. Councillor Swiggs.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. This is just more of a procedural question than a question of the content of the report, which is good, and thank you for the update. But it is just an update. And so the question that I have is, what is the decisions that we're making it as a council today? I'm hearing a lot of stuff that is being worked on. There's a lot of decisions that are kind of been made behind the scenes here. And I just think we're missing an opportunity as a council, having this in a council committee meeting, to actually potentially endorse that, to give you a better decision or better steer about where you're going. I just think we're missing an opportunity in these meetings to actually, have a mature decision-making framework and give them a bit more maturity. So what are the decisions that are coming out of this? And is there, I think we're just missing this opportunity.
I might start by trying to answer that, Councillor Swiggs, and then if I'm missing anything, Alex can pick me up. But it has just arrived as a piece of direction, and so Alex has rapidly turned around the advice for this council. And I think the next steps he's indicated is that we are continuing to look at it as what is the implications for our work program. And as Councillor Scott said, are we using this as an opportunity to look at our work program in biodiversity? And that is the case. So I think, yes, really good question, and there will be some guidance and decision making that comes out of this, but this is too soon. So this is the point, was we really wanted to take this opportunity to surface it in public with you today, because it's just so recent, and give you an opportunity to ask questions, but we will be coming back to you.
So I mean, this is great, and I'm not trying to have a go or anything. I think it's just, I think at this table we need to maturize our decision-making framework to be a lot more sort of, we're making decisions to guide the council in a way. And actually, I just look at this report, and from what you have said, I just think that there's a better way of having that, rather than there's note. If you look at number 6, staff will continue to develop their understanding for the implementation requirements of the MPSIB and will bring further guidance or further advice back to councillors. We could endorse that as a decision of this council today, which will give the better direction that, for the organisation going forward. I just think that would be a better resolution to have in there, and I might even move that as an amendment that we endorse that, to actually say, yep, we're happy, go ahead and do this work. I think it's a better way of making decisions, that's all. So maybe I'll move that as an amendment to actually say that we endorse point 6. Yeah, but we're noting. There's a difference between, from my point of view, there's a difference between noting and endorsing to actually go on and do some more work. That's where I'm coming from.
Thank you, Councillor Swiggs. I tend to agree with you. I'll just get the staff here to have a look and how we can. Councillor Pauling.
Don't disagree, Dion. I think that is a good approach, because it does give staff some clarity. You could even do that for resolution 4 on our table. Thanks, Alex. Amazing piece of work to turn this around in a short space of time. As noted, it's been 20 years coming, so it is significant, and there are some significant challenges for us. My question, I've got a few, but my first one related to those specific things that the TLAs are doing. If you could just give us like a real brief outline of what that is.
So as indicated in the report, TLAs are captured by the definition of local authorities generally. So everything in the body of that report that relates to them is something they'll have to do. Other more specific stuff I talked about just before is that it is ultimately onto the TLAs to do their district-wide SNA assessments and ground truthing, and amending and updating all of their district planning frameworks to include all of that information. There's also some specific responsibilities on them about working with tangata whenua to identify tonga. I think there's some specific wording about that, and it's not really up to the PLAs themselves to identify those tonga. It's up to the tangata whenua in each of those districts, or whatever particular runanga they will be working with, to do that, and only to the extent they're comfortable doing so. So, it won't be expected to be an exhaustive list of tonga when you do that, but it will be whatever identified as through that process. They also have responsibilities to sort of engage with us and others as a collaborator on a whole heap of the things that we're meant to be doing. So they're a stakeholder collaborator, and we have to take into account their district or TLA perspective in a bunch of our work, and I read the NPS as sort of directing them to engage with us in good faith on those sorts of elements. So those are probably the key specific matters that are relevant to TLAs.
Got it, Alex. That's really great because I think that point about the SNAs and the role we could play, I mean, it was, just so people know, it was canvassed at the Biodiversity Champions meeting. And hopefully, yeah, through a sort of engagement with the TLAs and via the Mural Forum, we might get some common ground on that. And there may be a role for us to do that mapping and desktop assessment, as Alex mentioned. So that there was some quite good feedback in the room. We didn't have every council there, but the ones that were there was some openness to that. So that was good. And I think that identification of taonga is quite a critical role for TLAs to be playing. And again, it's good to know that they can engage with us, because I could imagine that we could be quite helpful in that space as well, particularly with our relationships that we have. So, and that was a question that came from councils at the Biodiversity Champions team as well. So thanks, Alex. My question about the land cover target thing is, I've noticed that we've been doing some work in this space to understand how we assess that. Can you tell us a little bit about how that's going at the moment, or is that something you'd like to do in a follow-up paper?
I actually have reasonably good news about the status of that, which is it's a piece of work that's already been initiated to support the development of the regional planning process. So our science teams through Eco Index, which is the National Science Challenge sort of group, are looking at understanding the current extent of Indigenous vegetation cover across Canterbury, with the idea that we could using that 10% target as a baseline to make that assessment. So that will come, I'm assuming, when it's ready to be presented to this council and through Te Rauwhituia and through as part of the planning framework stuff. They've also sort of done a 15% analysis as well. So just I think to see what that might look like. So yeah, it's underway, and this council will see it in due course once it happens. So great.
Awesome work. My last question really is about, the Tangata Whenua partnership is obviously critical for both us and the TLAs. I think we've got our TLA sort of relationships well established through the Mural Forum and the Biodiversity Champion space. So, and I know that the staff work together well. My question is, and you've raised it there about Te Rauwhituia, we've also got to Paiheringa. So what are your thoughts about how we grow this and how we move to that next step with this work through our structures we have? What are your thoughts?
I'll reflect on the wording of the NPS in a lot of the instances. It's sort of what my thoughts are as a starting point, right? And that is that we're, for a whole heap of these things, working with and involving Tangata Whenua to the extent that they wish to be involved. So that's the starting point for our conversation. There's a lot of stuff in here. I see it probably as a progressive, phased approach myself. I don't know, that may not be the case. It's not for me to decide the extent to which Tangata Whenua wish to be involved, but I will have, I guess, a role in making sure that this organisation has a forum or uses the right forum to progress that conversation. And I think we've got we've seen some of this stuff coming and anticipated the NPS, so we've had some levels of service that roughly sort of talk to these sorts of things that had been a bit on hold. It's now over to us to sort of re-engage that conversation and work with Tangata Whenua to understand what their needs, aspirations, and level of involvement wants to be in here.
And I think that's a good answer. I think what we should be thinking about is when we think we might need to do an update to Te Rauwhituia and or to Paiheringa about this, just like we said before about the summary, there might be MFE guidance already. Likewise with the community, what is it that we'll put out about this? I do have something to raise with councillors that I think it could be a good idea that we did something from the chair or even the chair of this committee in the media about this being released, some of the positives, some of the challenges. So that's something to put out there to the table. So got it.
Thanks for your patience, Councillor Robinson.
Good morning. I'm sorry I wasn't here for the pre-meeting, so I'm not sure if you sort of discussed particular areas that I'm about to just bring up. Just with regards to number 27, the scoping exercise for biodiversity. And I note that to date, it has been focused on terrestrial biodiversity, which is all good. But I'm just wondering if, with the coastal environment plan also on the cards in the next wee while, if we can look at developing a monitoring plan that works together with the terrestrial biodiversity, so that, you know, it's integrated, of course, but there's a lot of elements that happen on land that affects the coastal marine space, especially sediment and the likes, and some of those migrating species. I'm just wondering if that will encompass that in when you actually look at developing the monitoring plan. Thank you.
I think I mentioned it briefly before, but in implementing this NPS, its focus and its directive is about the terrestrial environment. So we've got, I guess, an imposed priority on us to sort of think about that in the first instance. That said, a comprehensive regional biodiversity monitoring framework would look beyond the terrestrial environment, but I think that is a decision for this council, because once you start adding elements to that, it obviously increases the scale and cost and all of those other components. So you can always do more. It would be a question of this council making a decision about whether that's where you want us to focus that effort. So it's live, I guess, as an option, and it will always be an option to do that. We may get directive about that in future, but for now, our focus will be on looking at the NPS IB implementation, and I guess, yeah, talking to council about whether they would like to be more comprehensive in that space, or phase that in future. But yeah.
Councillor Karakia.
Good, Alex. Hey, my question is, it comes back to point 15 and engagement with tangata whenua, mana whenua. And one of your comments was that you need to go out and actually, you know, kōrero, talk to them, see how they want. Do you think that that hui that you were at actually on Thursday, the 20th of July, which I actually will report back on when asked it right at the end, because at you, Carl Diamond, along with the harbour master, were there. Surely, do you think that that gave you a very, very clear idea on how mana whenua want to be involved in this?
Can I just clarify, the hui you're referencing related to the Mediterranean sandworm in Littleton Harbour? Yeah. I mean, the indications from that are obviously that this sort of stuff in general is critically important to mana whenua, and because of the values that they hold about all sorts of things, you know, the environment for environment's sake, and other more tangible things like mahinga kai and all those sorts of things. So
my question is though, but you know, you've been there and actually seeing and hearing, and the way that they actually came up with all the policy, Biosecurity New Zealand, MPI, Christchurch City Council, all of that, but does that give you a clear idea on how they want to actually be involved and get this implemented yesterday?
I guess so. It's a tough question. I guess it's challenging for me to answer that question and then take a meeting that was about something else specific and apply it to implementing some other directive pieces of national direction. Yes, it gives me a broad picture. I don't think I could take that meeting and tick a box that says we've engaged with tangata whenua on implementing elements of the NPS IB, for example. Yeah.
So my point is that what you're saying here is actually quite general. Yeah. And go back to what Councillor Sweeks was saying, is that, you know, we need to kind of pull it in and give you some more direction. So at the end, I'll actually highlight those points, main points from that hui, which will give you again and remind you about the direction that mana whenua wants.
Councillor Robinson.
I apologise, I actually had a supplementary there, but I didn't get my hand up quick enough. It actually also reflects on what Councillor Karakia and Swigs was actually saying. So I kind of want to make myself a little bit more clear with regards to 27, is that I would like to see implementation of coastal in relation to terrestrial for a monitoring plan for the region. And I think that's the only way to actually make things move forward with not losing sight of what is coming up. And when the coastal environment plan comes to being authored, we need to refocus again on what we need to do, whereas we could just keep threading it through. And I think that's the only way to get integrated monitoring. Is that possible, please?
I don't necessarily think that's for me to answer. I think I've done the best I can in indicating that doing more than what the NPS requires is a question for this council to consider, and possibly not now. It's well outside the scope of this paper, and I'm sorry about that, Councillor Robinson.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you have a comment?
Mr. Chairman, I think this is a pure conversation at the start of a process that we need to go through. We have an opportunity through the RPS to be more specific about the issues that other councils are bringing into this. But look, to put this in context, I think you're putting too much pressure on this young man to explain everything that he's only just getting his head around. Yeah, good job.
Yeah, I'd just like to acknowledge it. So it's been very good. Thank you for that. Can I then go to getting someone to move the motion? Oh, sorry, I thought you were pointing at Councillor Robinson. My apologies, Councillor Cranwell.
Kia ora, just to carry on from Councillor Paulin and Councillor Korako, and this is probably directed at our chair, that regarding the NPSIB in relation to the RPS, that in his email that he does each week, that we highlight this possibility and then front foots it on with the ngā runanga as well. Kia ora.
Councillor Edge.
Sorry, Chair, just to pick up on Councillor Robinson's, item 3.4 in the NPS talks about integrated approach. And it does actually say that local authorities must manage Indigenous biodiversity and the effects from subdivision, use and development in an integrated way, which means recognising the interconnectedness of the whole environment and the interactions between the terrestrial environment, freshwater and the coastal marine area. So that's, I think, Councillor Robinson's concerns probably addressed in that.
Thank you for that. Apologies again, Councillor Cremon. So no one else? Can we get someone please to move the motion? I'm aware that Councillor Swiggs wants to move an amendment.
I'll move it.
It has to be a new person, a second, I think.
When they move the motion, make some changes to the staff at that point.
Yeah.
Either that or someone can make an amendment.
Okay, so to clarify, Councillor Swiggs, if you were keen to move the motion, you could actually make it a change, and that might be a good time to put the amendment in. And thank you, Councillor Paulin.
So I believe Councillor Pauline has sent an amended motion for number 4. I just changed the wording a little bit. I think it's been sent to Oliver, so and all councillors as well. And as I said in the question time, it's just going to give a little bit more direction. I think we need to be, when we come to these decision making times, we're making decisions for the council to move forward, and I just think it gives a bit more clarity rather than just no.
Mr. Chair. Yeah. What's happening here with the process? Read the amendment.
Certainly, Councillor Davies. The substantive has been moved and an amendment made by the mover. Actually, yes.
Yeah, I don't feel comfortable with a recommendation in an open agenda being amended without a record of that amendment.
So just to get around that,
Can we note that in the agenda? Yes, we will. Yes. Kia ora. Yes, Councillor Davies, that we are noting the minutes about the updated resolutions. Yes, with the.
Kia ora. Thanks, Dion. Yeah, thanks. Joe, I acknowledge that. It's not substantively different though. It's just changed the word from note to endorse, and it's added in bring back advice to the committee, which is from point 6 in the paper. So it hasn't used any new words that's not in the paper, but take your point that it should be noted that we did propose that to be amended. Just to speak to the wider paper, firstly to acknowledge Alex for your work that you've done and the team to turn this advice around for us in a short space of time, and to acknowledge the foresight of the staff previously to get on with some of the things that we could see in the drafts, particularly around the monitoring, which we can see is going to be really critical going forward, the land cover analysis, and like our work on the regional biodiversity strategy over time. So acknowledge that, and of course the biodiversity champions process that was set in place mainly through the leadership of Lan Farm last term, which I think will come to fruition now because we all need to work together. So just acknowledging that, and that it is significant, like I said earlier on, like it is 20 years in the making. This has been floating around for a while, and it's great to see some clarity around this issue for all of us, actually, for councils, for TLAs, for regional councils, for tangata whenua, and our communities. So we can really get in behind and try to achieve some of these things that are set out in here. And remember, the overall purpose is to maintain Indigenous biodiversity, so no overall loss of biodiversity, which has been an issue for us for a long time. So I want to acknowledge that. And in terms of the 10% target thing, we know that on the Canterbury Plains in particular, there's less than 1% of Indigenous vegetation cover left. So 10% on the plains, if you could split it up like that, would be a massive target to reach. And I know this because, as you'll know, I've got various involvement in trusts that have been trying to help that target for a long time. 20 years almost worth of planting and 200,000 plants in the ground, and we haven't even moved it by 0.2%. So just to let you know, it's a massive effort to get that up on the Canterbury Plains. But when you take in the whole region, I'm really interested to see what that number is for us, actually. So I'm looking forward to that work being completed. And I note there's some other cool things in the MPS. 3.21 in the MPS is around promoting restoration, which I think is really cool to see. That's not lost on me and the work that others in our community do, including our landowners that have been doing great work out there. And that for resource consents in 3.24, you have to change the rules of both district plans or local authority plans to ensure that where Indigenous biodiversity may be impacted, that an ecological report is required. So I think that's pretty cool. I think that's a good step forward. Again, that's that issue that Alex raised earlier about the capacity within councils to be able, and maybe within the consultancies, to deal with that requirement. But I think that can only be a good thing over time. So yeah, all in all, really support this work. I'm really glad it's here, and I'm glad we've got ahead of that curve, but really looking forward to the work we've got on. And thank you again, Alex. You've done a great job, Kia ora.
Councillor Edge.
Discussion item, just a couple of things from me. Yeah, it's got this Indigenous biodiversity NPS is very timely for us and the whole of New Zealand, really, in terms of getting on with ensuring that our biodiversity is not going to get lost as from sort of this week, and that the biodiversity that we've got will be maintained, and elements of protection as well, and better management of the biodiversity that we have got. For me, I'm even looking at the report from Alex, item 22 and 25, talks about the regional biodiversity strategy and promoting landscape scale restoration, and that ties in with our strategic direction, which council approved just a couple of weeks ago. So that's really good too. And landscape scale habitat, and that can only be good for the region's larger biodiversity areas. For example, our high country tussock land, which has been under threat for a while. So I think this coordinated approach, Spatial Planning Act, is going to come in as well. So some of this may actually be important for that too. So really supportive of this, and looking forward to engagement in the future with the Canterbury Regional Biodiversity Strategy upgrade, so that we're back on track and getting on with an agreed way forward.
Councillor Karakia.
Kia ora. I tautoko actually the previous speakers, particularly Alex, about the work that you've done. I think just one thing around Te Ao Māori is that, and I know that this paper is very much about biodiversity, but it's around also the Kiutakitai, the whole thing, and a lot of discussion. Part of it took place actually, as I said, last week, but it was about the biosecurity and how biodiversity, it's about the land, what comes off there, the clean hole stuff, cleaning it on the beach, so it's actually on the land and then it comes back. So to us, actually, Te Ao Māori, it's actually more around, it's not just separate, it's actually, and as Councillor Edge said, it was about the interconnectedness of that. But I know that it's kind of one step at a time, but kia ora to you and your
But yes, Councillor Swiggs.
And just to close it off, I mean, again, great work, and there's I think
Sorry, Councillor McKenzie, didn't see you down the end there.
Oh, no, that's all right. It's my fault for sitting at the far end of the table. Look, I endorse the comments that you've done a good job of presenting us with fair facts of the MPS for biodiversity. I just want to caution the enthusiasm for trying to introduce rules as a way of saying, oh, we've saved the planet, because we've still got to work with the landowners. And if in implementing this, and I see there's some significant areas of risk where landowners might say, this having biodiversity on my property is actually a liability, not an asset, then we will lose biodiversity anyway because they will clear it out. And I think we need to, as a council, we need to think about how we can make sure that implementing these requirements from central government is seen as a way of, by landowners in particular, as a benefit to them rather than as a liability. And already I'm fielding calls from people who see it as a threat to their properties, not an asset. And I refer back to the Wetlands Farm Assets project, which was very much around helping farmers, landowners think about wetlands as assets. We need to encourage landowners to think about biodiversity values on their properties as assets, not as a liability in the way we implement this.
Right, just again, I was just going to say great work, and I just wanted to reflect on going out, and actually it was when I went to North Canterbury with Councillor East and speaking to some of our teams on the ground doing the actual mahi in the biodiversity space on the farms. And I just wanted to reflect that, we do have some amazing people on the ground doing some really good work as well in this space. And I think this direction gives another step in that piece of work, which is really good. So I just wanted to make sure that those people are reflected, and I hear really good comments about the people on the ground doing the work. And just to not to lose sort of sight on the substantive work that we're doing here, but just in terms of the amendment in the change of number 4, our standing orders 23.4 substituted motion allow for that to happen. So end of debate on that one. Thank you very much.
Kia ora, thank you all. It's extremely interesting. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Item 8.3, supporting wetlands on farm. Kia ora, welcome to the table.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Verity Halkett, I hope. The purpose of this item is to note the conclusion of the Managing Wetlands as Farm Assets project. I'll provide just a very brief summary and then seek to take the paper as read. Sean Burkett is here too to assist with any questions that come up as well. The project sought to provide farmers with practical advice and to share knowledge about the benefits that wetlands bring both within individual farming systems and within the wider community. The project was designed and implemented as a farmer-led project, with Environment Canterbury and other industry partners providing support and resources depending on the needs that were identified. Environment Canterbury supported the project from a governance, a technical and a financial perspective, alongside a number of other project partners. So the project partners are all committed to supporting the ongoing momentum that was achieved by the project. Environment Canterbury provides for wetland protection, restoration and enhancement in a variety of ways. For example, through advice, including on the ground good practice management, and through resource consent advice. There's project delivery, condition and extent monitoring of wetland, as well as support for landowners to comply with the regulations. There'll continue to be specific advice and outcome monitoring provided for the 14 project sites that were included in the original project. Yeah, but we're happy, I guess, to cover any specific questions relating to the paper.
Councillor Mackay.
You can overrule me if it's not. I'm going to have to make a question out of point 25, which is around staff working, or Environment Canterbury working to ensure that the process for and applying for resource consents is as smooth as possible. There's quite a considerable upfront cost around that consenting process, often relative to the actual on the ground work, because so much of it's done in kind by different stakeholders that are actually involved. I'm just wondering, is there a possibility, and it's possibly not a decision that staff will make, hopefully it'll be a council table, that we could look at perhaps subsidising the cost of those consents for the likes of wetland construction, or even some of the biodiversity stuff that we were doing before?
I think it's probably something that the LTP is more appropriate for something like that. And I certainly don't want to put staff on the spot for anything at this stage. Is that a fair call? Everyone happy with that? Councillor Uncle?
I'm happy with the resolution to the question, but it sits in my mind the conversation we had over on the peninsula of the challenges of facilitating putting things in place and the costs and the regulatory processes. So I think it's a valid question of how do we simplify the regulatory consenting process to make outcomes happen, rather than get tied up. So I just think it's a valid question, given the conversation, and it was a wider conversation than just the councillors that agreed to the challenges.
I acknowledge that, and certainly the fact that it's in the report, it certainly makes it valid. Councillor Scott?
Just while we're banging on about this, I think we need to look, as a council, we need to look at the opportunity for mystifying this process and taking some of the cost out of it. There are many people that want to get involved in this, many people that see wetlands as an opportunity to actually scrub up some water that's leaving their property. Yet, as these two councillors have alluded to, the cost is prohibitive, and the planning stuff around there is prohibitive. And I'm just wondering whether there's a mechanism in through the planning process that we're in at the moment that can actually alleviate that from landowners, because it would seem to me that if you're willing to do something, it shouldn't cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars, which it has in some cases across Canterbury.
Thank you for that. Has anyone got any questions? Kia ora, thank you.
It's just still going on about item 25. And we do have a consenting issue, obviously, about the cost of to construct a new on-farm wetland. Do we have a good definition of what a constructed, or what are the opportunities for a constructed wetland in order to assess the benefits from those? Is there a guidance document or a paper on that?
I think there's a NIWA guideline document around those wetlands that we would probably
used to advise landowners. Yeah.
Does that include assessment of the ability of constructed wetlands or wetlands to retain water and assist in river management and runoff? Is that part of the picture as well?
I'm not 100% sure of what that document might contain, though.
Perhaps we can come back. Yes, we can make sure that information gets to you. Councillor Swiggs.
Yeah, again, sorry, I don't know what sort of mood I was in when I read these papers. But again, I'm just going to drum on the same beat that I had before, is what decisions are we making from this paper? Are we just receiving this report, or are we actually going to be making some form of decision? I've got these points highlighted here. So I've got the note that Environment Canterbury will be continuing to provide ongoing support to wetland demonstration sites. And then in the financial implications in point 27, that these things will be going on within the existing budgets. Now that's cool. You know, I'm personally fine with that, but I don't know if everybody would be. But I just wanted to know, you know, what are the decisions that are coming out of this paper, if there are any, or are we just receiving this report? So, sorry, I want to make sure, same thing really.
It's the end of the project that we were a partner in, and so the funding has come to a conclusion. So the purpose of the paper was to bring you the conclusion of the report and for you to receive it. So that is really the purpose of this paper.
So again, it's not necessarily just noting, it's actually we're receiving the paper and kind of endorsing something to say, yep, you're going to be continuing working with the demonstration side. That's all I'm really saying, is that as a council, we need to be just thinking, every meeting when we get a paper, we're making decisions of something. And there are decisions coming out of this, as far as I've seen. That's
what just following on for Councillor Swiggs, that's what I was thinking when I read the paper and things. We have the 3 points highlighted, and then in the actual report itself, it talks about next steps, working together. But I suppose it's probably wetlands is a huge for ECAN. How can we really get in there? And when you heard one of the examples when we were over there in February was that one farmer talking about the difficulties and everything, trying to get work on these wetlands, and Councillor Mackay has already brought that up. That's probably next steps forwards for me out of that would be assisting farmers and actually getting more wetlands, or the wetlands that they do have. How do we can make sure that it's an easier process? And then from the project, is there further funding that actually, or is there anything else? And I suppose Councillor McKenzie hopefully will answer after me, is that because he's deeply involved in this. Actually, next steps, is there actually more funding to apply for to actually continue on in those sites? Kia ora.
Yes, Councillor McKenzie. Thank you.
Then on to what I really wanted to say which is the recommendations that are coming out of this paper, and that is the project itself. So as the chair of that project, so when I say we, I'm referring to the project rather than me as a councillor. We are hoping that the regional council will continue to consider wetlands as a priority habitat or landform in terms of investing part of your biodiversity funds into and promoting. There are some specific proposals that I think the project would like to make. One of them is that one of the things that was most valued by the landowners involved in this project was the advice that came from staff in terms of how to manage their wetland areas. And one of the conclusions from, especially in areas where there is a degree of Indigenous seed bank left behind already, is actually fencing your wetland might be all you have to do, and they will recover naturally. And so you don't have to go to hundreds of thousands of dollars of planting up these wetlands if you've actually got enough Indigenous vegetation left behind. And so again, our staff can do that, but we haven't got enough staff. So I think part of this recommendation would be is would be for this committee to consider whether, for the long-term plan, recommendations as to whether, in fact, the regional council should be funding more resources into full-time FTEs to help. What's his name? Harry, Jason, yeah. And you know, to clone him and provide more basis for that, so that we can actually, so rather than actually funding fencing and planting and specific on-farm, on-land work, just provide be the go-to people for advice on what's the best way. Here we have a wet area on a bit of land, whether it's urban or rural. What's the best way about going and allowing that to restore? And I would have thought that then lines up with this biodiversity strategy and MPS that's just come out. Because a lot of the time it's not about spending money. I mean, the other point that Claire and John have already made is that for those who want to create artificial wetlands, and whether the Hariri lagoon on the Horsell is artificial or trying to make it revert back to its natural state, it's reconstructed. So there are. I'm not trying to be. I'm trying to be positive here. Don't trip me up. But reconstructing wetlands in areas that are naturally wet, there's a definition as to which is constructed and what isn't constructed and what's natural and what's not. But the point is, if there are impediments in terms of consenting costs and NIWA guidelines, and that we translated the NIWA guidelines into the consenting process for a constructed wetland to literally where it should have been a guideline rather than a compulsory acquisition, which blew the budget out to implement the NIWA guidelines as a compulsory consent condition was going to cost an additional $500,000 or something. And that sort of, we've got to think about how we can enable stuff to happen where clearly the outcomes are going to be good. And that'll be a bit around whether it's constructed or whether it's regenerating and, you know, all those sorts of things. So that recommendation around consenting processes enabling is really a strong one. And the other is really the resourcing of FTEs for that advisory work in the background.
Councillor Scott?
Just wonder whether we should get back to the paper, actually.
Yeah, sorry, Craig.
Wait, kia ora. So back to the paper, yeah. But I think that was good, useful, because I think what we're saying here is that we're really positive of the work that can happen, but we want to see a little bit more of us endorsing those specific things. Because my questions are around point 24, which talks about the preparation of the wetland plans, which has obviously been something that we've really helped with in these projects and something that we're saying we can carry on with. My question is, what's the process for this? Like, how do people know that they can get that support? So yeah, that's my question. What's the process for getting yourself a wetland plan if you've got an idea for your property? Because we're saying we can do it. So what's the process?
The process would be to have one of our staff turn up on site through however means they've contacted ECAN or we've contacted them because there's a wetland of interest, using the expertise that we currently have in our teams to develop a wetlands management plan. It's a evolving plan. It doesn't sort of non-statutory really. Yeah, and just to be able to use our staff.
Because I think that's really good to know. But as might have heard, maybe we don't have enough support in that space to maybe open that up to the whole world. Because if we got 100 people that came tomorrow and said, "Oh, I'd like to do a wetland on my property," would be able to handle it. So I really think this where it does lead into the LTP process, and particularly around the consenting point, which is noted in point 25 of the paper that Councillor Mackay brought up and others have supported. I think we do need like a briefing on what that could look like. So there's the consenting part of it, there's the preparation of planning, which is obviously staff support, and all those things, what does that look like? And then that goes into the LTP process, so we know what we're either going to support funding for or go out to the community with. But I think that's where this all ends up. So thank you. Question, but then a comment. I do support what Dion said about Point 2 could have been endorsed as well, endorse the planned program of work to support the continuation of the, but then actually saying the specific things that we're doing, even though it's in point 22 to 26. I just think it would be good to know that's what we're talking about. So, kia ora.
Thank you. Very good. Very good. Nothing else? Can I have someone to move them, please? Thank you, Councillor Ward. Do I have a seconder? Thanks, Councillor Sunkel. No more discussion. There is more discussion.
Well, actually, this time I'll do a different way of understanding orders, and I might move an amendment just to say support the planned program of work to support the continuation of the project's momentum. Well, endorse, yeah, maybe endorse or support. I'm just going to make it. I'm going to do a different process this time in understanding orders, and I'll make an amendment. No, I've made an amendment. I'm moving an amendment, and I'll need a seconder for it.
Thank you. Yeah, just amuse yourselves. We're just getting that typed up. So, absolutely.
Craig made a really good point about needing a briefing on what it might look like in terms of what would go into the LTP. So, Dion, is this amendment encouraging that process, and do we need to be specific about that, or does this cover that intent?
Could we note that after this, say, in particular around the consenting processing, the sort of staff support, wetland planning that leads into LTP? I mean, just note that underneath. I don't know. I mean, if you add that all to the amendment, that could get quite long, but if there's a way to just note it underneath it, so that's it. That's what we're talking about. Yeah.
And I talked before about staff having a look at the biodiversity work program in the light of the NPS. This was the whole context that we were looking at it in. So it's, I don't know whether you want to specifically line it up, but when we talked about looking at the priority of where we spend the money in biodiversity, this was, and the guidance that you've given today is really valuable in terms of helping shape up what that is that we bring back. But it was, we were going to look at it holistically. I don't know if Alex or Sean, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I might leap to the defence of some of the recommendations, if that's all right. And I draw your attention back to the terms of reference for this committee, which explicitly excludes you from making decisions that might impact in this room anyway on long-term plan or annual plan decisions that you've made previously. So that's probably why we've gone for noting rather than other sort of more directive wording in a few instances this time around. I'm conscious that there's also a live long-term planning process underway, in which this council will have to consider not just where biodiversity sits and biosecurity sits in its listed priorities and preferred actions, but balance and prioritise the work of the whole organisation. And I guess putting, I mean, yeah, we'd love to come and talk to you in briefings about wetlands, but if it's in the context of the long-term plan, then we'll probably have to do that in the framework that's being set up to support that whole process. So yes, we can progress that conversation, but in that context specifically, there's already a process underway, and we will be feeding into that as sort of policy advisors for the portfolio coming. It's possibly just, yeah, maybe not specific to the elements of this paper. It will be part of council's broader conversation about priorities or specific conversations about biodiversity priorities. As a follow-up to that.
As a follow-up to that, well, I guess what I'd like to see from this committee for biodiversity is these are the options, these are the costs, and council, give us your advice as to where you think your priorities lie. And so, as long as that is brought back to us at some stage as a result of the amendment, then I'm happy. But I think we need to have the specifics. And if the recommendation, if the recommendation in this project is, let's say, 3 more FTEs in terms of weapons, that's not saying that's what's going to go into the LTP, but at least that's perhaps that's a bit of direction as to where you might do some budgets around, and then the council will make decisions on that as a priority. Is that okay?
Just Councillor Edge. Yes, we are discussing them.
Just related to that, in terms of the concern expressed by staff about the budgeting for that, but in item 27, the financial implications are that this work program is undertaken within current budgets, and other budgets will take place in the LGP process and discussions. So for me, that amendment meets that requirement. And in terms of the staff, we're acknowledging, and we could acknowledge it in a minute, that a briefing will come to us to address the NPS and address perhaps those other issues in terms of priorities.
You'll remember we talked very briefly as we were getting this meeting ready to go. We talked about action points being put in to give some context to discussions. So that may well, in fact, be an action point. If everyone is comfortable with that.
I'm fine. That would be a good way of doing it. Thanks.
And while we've been over here sort of looking through bits and pieces, could someone give me some wording for that action point? Craig?
I just think it's about considering further support through the LTP process. So that's, you could even add that on the end of the resolution if you wanted to, if it didn't flip people out too much, but or just have a separate action point.
Yeah, thanks for that. Brilliant. So no more discussion. I'll put it to everyone. Those in favour say aye, please. Against? Hallelujah. Oh, so, yeah, no, that's only the first bit. That's, yeah. So the substantive motion now. Yes. So the substantive. Now, excuse my naivety on this, just to make sure that I'm clear. Do I need a new move? We're great. Okay. All those in favour of the substantive motion that's on your screen, say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Yeah, but item 8.4, Biodiversity Biosecurity Quarterly Work Program Updates. Welcome again to the table, Alex. Welcome to you. Thank you, Kate.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Kate Rutherford tōku ingoa. I'm here to present the Biodiversity and Biosecurity Quarterly Work Program Update. I'll take it as read and I'll go through it very briefly, but the purpose of this update is to provide a Q4 update for the 2022-2023 financial year for the B&B portfolio, but excluding Braided River Revival program. That program reports to the Catchment Resilience Committee, so you'll see that this afternoon. The attachment to the paper provides an update on the levels of service and the key initiatives within the 4 programs that are captured in this update. It's important to note that the levels of service are just a preliminary results. They'll be finalised once the audit process has been completed. You'll see that we've got a good result across the levels of service in this portfolio. We didn't, though, achieve target 13.2, and that has previously been signalled to council, and this is due to the government not releasing the NPSIB in the timeframes that were originally anticipated when that target was set. And there's been some discussion earlier with Alex around that. That's the end of my little bit, and I'll open up for any questions.
Councillor Pauling.
Hey, thanks for this. So just on that last point, so I understand we didn't make it for the 22-23 year, but we're now in the 23-24 year. So what's our anticipation for that work now? Are we going to carry on? Are we going to pick that up? we're going to hopefully achieve it, and how might we do that?
So it's obviously we're still in the third year of our long-term plan. It's still a commitment that this council has. So I guess as part of now the broader suite of conversations we need to be having about NPSID implementation and working with Tangata Whenua in partnership, that goes back into the mixer. And hopefully we can make some progress there. But I again, as I had earlier today, referred you back to the wording of that NPS, and it's about working with Tangata Whenua to the extent that they wish to be involved. So I won't give you a defined time frame for how that conversation might look, but just noting that, yeah, we're live channels of communication to start making significant progress towards that.
Back to our point about the Toropatua, getting that into there. Cool. Second question. I know in a few of these about the biodiversity snapshot report. Can you tell us, has that been done or is it coming up, and when maybe be able to see that or get a link?
That is coming in the next week or so.
Yeah,
it's imminent.
And it will be accompanied by a CI that this council will say, so you'll get notified.
And will it have maps? And last one, on the Meurako ones, which is 17 on page 59. Again, this is more of a 23-24 year question. I understand that we've had one catchment, so it's been about one catchment at the moment. Well, I think we're moving to two. I think I'm right. So I'm just saying, can we have an update maybe at the next meeting about how we're going on that? How's the decision making going on that, and what might we move to? Yeah.
I believe the program lead for that, Andrew Arps, has been working on some material for council already, and I guess whether it comes in the form of a briefing or into the next committee meeting, we'll work with them to get it talked to you.
Dare I say a second action point? I do. Idea. Can I have someone to? Are there any other questions? Can I have someone to move? Thank you, Councillor Pauling. Councillor Swig, seconded. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye, please. Against? No. Thank you. No. Uh, 8.5, report from the chair. This report is really just to give a bit of a snapshot on some of the work that both myself and Deputy Chair Councillor Ward have been involved with. Really, I presume it's been read. There are a number of bits and pieces in the activities in the background that perhaps individual councillors who have been involved with this, including a couple of additions since the time it was written. Perhaps Councillor Southworth, you might give it might be an opportunity to mention the biodiversity credits discussion paper, which might give some hope for Councillor McKenzie.
Yeah, it's just really high level. It's so just out available on the MFE's website is a consultation document on the biodiversity credit system, and it's about developing a system that's got a framework that means that the intentions of it, which is to enhance Indigenous biodiversity, can be you can have some certainty. It's about increasing investment, particularly from various sources, but particularly private sector investors, to enhance biodiversity, enhance native biodiversity, which is recognised as in real need of investment. And there's we have the National Biodiversity Implementation Plan, and a key part of that's missing is often the funding. And so looking at a credit system that can bring in funding from various sources in private sector to deliver on all the biodiversity work that we need to do, that needs to happen across the country, is a real opportunity. So it's really about how do we establish the system, what is the key parts to make sure that it delivers on the opportunities that are there. How can we be sure that it's going to deliver on what it's intended to? Is there an opportunity for it to connect into sort of like regional and national strategies and help? Can you direct private investment in some sort of prioritised way? So hooking up with the type of work that councils do and that happens at national level. So it's really open-minded and, you know, real the options that are there. They've been looking at overseas schemes that have already, or systems already in place. So there's the opportunity right the way through to 3rd of November. So it's got a really long consultation period, which is really important. Start looking now, don't leave it to the last week, which always seems to be how it feels like, not our organisation, but as an individual, when you have an interest, often your last few days you gather your thoughts together. But yeah, time to sort of think about it and discuss with various groups and organisations and really put together something. And I know that we'll put together a really good mission, I'm sure, as an organisation. But great to see it there. Really good initiative and opportunity. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you for that. Councillor Karakia, could you please fill people in on the meeting that we had at Turunanga o Ngaitahu?
Kia ora, Chair. Alex, I've kind of, in some ways, possibly jumped the gun around biodiversity, but as I sort of finished off with at the end, is that a way biodiversity, biosecurity, particularly in a Māori worldview, is actually, there's no kind of difference. But it just shows you again how connected and involved Te Hapua Ngāti Wheke Rapaki are actually with the issues that they see now and then in the future. And it's not a nice legacy that they're looking at, you know, to leave tamariki and mokopuna. So just to sort of highlight some of the work that's been done, there was a hui at Turunanga o Ngaitahu last Thursday, and we're very appreciative of the fact that we had our ECAN staff there. Alex, Carl is also the harbour master as well. So we had ECAN, we had the Littleton Port Company, we had Biodiversity New Zealand, we had MPI and DOC as well. And Te Hapua Ngāti Wheke Rapaki, it was chaired by our Turunanga o Ngaitahu representative, Gail Gordon, and there's also Rapaki Tangatiaki that were there as well. The purpose of the hui really was about invasive species in Whakaraupo and Te Pātako o Rakai Hautu. It was also about the removal of derelict wharfs at the Littleton Port, and it was also about actually developing a clean hull policy within Te Pātaka, and particularly Littleton. And out of it, the main points. Is this going to be minuted?
It's recorded.
Good, great. Long as it's recorded, good. Because it's not part of the agenda, but anyway. So the main part was that the action to contain famwern within Littleton Harbour, that was the major invasive species. Even though there's Asian kelp, there's actually about 3 or 4 others. But coming out of that meeting, it was agreed that it's a collective responsibility. And that's why all of those agencies, mana whenua and all that, were actually present that day. All parties, including iwi, hapu, council, regional council, central government, and their agencies such as Biodiversity New Zealand, MPI, etc., were all there, and the boating community, which is a really important part of it. What they're trying to do too is to actually develop some kind of consensus between regional regulators and national regulators, because, you know, there's the coastal policy statement, and they concentrated on various policies there, particularly around harmful aquatic organisms and Indigenous ones as well. And so the other part was around costs also, and that was really important, and how they could actually access funding and all of that to try and start to assist in changing the policies. But it all came back to the clean hull policy, because at the moment there is a kind of a policy, but it's got no teeth. And so it's very, very hard to police. So there are ideas that came up there on how they could do that, actually using mandated council staff, mandated tangatiaki as well. And that's where MPI came in. There was a few other things that what Rapaki believe is that it needs to happen now.
because with the continual rising of the temperature of the water around the harbour and inside the harbour is actually really it just creates this whole situation where it's going to be accelerated. So what came out of the meeting, we thought it was a really good opportunity to engage. And then, as I said to Alex earlier, is that it just shows you how active Te Hapua Ngāti Wheke Rapaki are in this whole space, because it concerns them. But the problem is that there's no real teeth within the regulations. And the big thing here too was the frustration that our coastal policy statements and all of that regional is actually not, there doesn't seem to be some urgency in that. And so, that's what came out of it as well. But all in all, and thank you to the chair who attended as well, Councillor Burns. And yeah, I think and it's not the first, it hasn't finished. They'll continue to push this. And you saw John Cottier when he came here, he's the one who led this from Rapaki. And so John is completely dedicated to actually getting some kind of solution to this huge issue that's actually going to affect us now and in the future. That's it.
Kia ora, thanks for that. I'd just like to acknowledge the staff that were there too. It was fantastic to have you there. I don't want to single anyone out, but there was a particular session where someone identified what in fact had been going on, and it was enlightening for all of those there and provided some occasion to sort of literally come together and look forward to a future. I won't harp on, and knowing that Councillor Ward is very concise, do you want to briefly just mention your wilding pines and wallabies? Sorry, Councillor Scott, have you got your hand up for a... Oh, sorry, I was sure. Okay, thank you. Councillor Wood, could you concisely?
I'll just add that you were lucky enough last week to get another $500,000 for wilding pine control. Been nice to have another north on the end of it, but anyway, that is going to be used to do a bit of tidy up work from last year and the year before. That's about all I've got to add at this stage.
Fantastic, thank you for that. Councillor Scott, would you like to?
Just a challenge to you, Mr. Chairman. We did say at the start of this triennium when we set these committees up that we were going to do some field trips as a council, and we haven't done that. We spent a really good time with the regional people down in Tekapo. We had some really good presentations from Carl and other staff. I think the opportunity for us to take these two committees on the road on the 8th of November should be looked at, because it gives us an opportunity to actually do some river stuff, and it gives us an opportunity also to get some presentations on some of those things that are at the other end of the of where we are. And I'm not suggesting that South Canterbury is a be all and end all of places, but we could also go north maybe in the following year.
Challenge accepted. Councillor Pauling.
I might have another action for you in a minute. But I'm just going to give a quick update about the Biodiversity Champions Hui that we had here on the Tuesday, the 18th of July. So we had representatives from Kaikoura, Selwyn, Ashburton, Mackenzie, Waitaki and Huranui. So that's a mixture of staff and councillors, and also, of course, our staff here from Environment Canterbury. And just the main highlights. I got elected the chair. Alex, remember that? So that happened. Unopposed. I think that was more convenient for people, so no big deal there. And we definitely got into, near the end of the meeting, obviously the national policy statement that we've talked about already in this meeting was hot off the press, so that came up. And the main thing around that was about working together towards the Merrill Forum meeting coming up, and about maybe that stuff around the SNA process that came out of it. There was other things, of course, about the stock takes and stuff we'd done previously, and a note that, appreciation, like I said before, for the work that Lan had done last term, but also about how it had actually resulted in more staff throughout the districts, coming up with biodiversity stuff. So that was really cool to see. So I'm going to follow up with Alex about going back out and doing a follow up after that meeting to everyone. So, kia ora, thank you. Oh, and it's potentially, like I mentioned earlier in the meeting, about either Greg or could be myself to do like an editorial or a media statement about the MPS for biodiversity and take what Ian said earlier into account, that there are challenges with this, but just doing a bit of a media release or something about it. So anyway, put that on the.
Might take my mind off letters to the editor. Councillor Edge.
Just a North Canterbury thing. Just to let people know that since our last meeting, I think most of our biodiversity advisory groups have met, elected chairs and deputy chairs, and had early discussions about what the biosecurity issues might be. Certainly North Canterbury in June, that was really well received, and we had some good discussions. And at the Kaikoura Zone Committee on Friday, your trip there was much appreciated. They indicated you were the first biodiversity chair to visit the zone committee. So that was good. And in terms of biosecurity, it was noted that some concerns still with invasive pest plants, Spanish heath and Scottish heath, particularly in the St James area. So we're keeping staff are keeping an eye on that in conjunction with Doc and Lynn's. We did have a discussion about the black-backed gull and the effects that was possibly having on deaths of black-billed gulls and other endangered species. So some further work's being done on that. It's a Tonga species. And so there's just a bit of concern about if we're controlling black-backed gulls to ensure we're not endangering or that they're not endangering other species. So there's a little bit of work being done, I think, through the Runanga on that.
Kia ora, thank you for that. Nothing else? Oh, there is, Councillor Korako.
Can I just table this this report from our biodiversity, biosecurity hui that we had?
I'm tempted to look at Joe and say, can I do that? I can do anything. Of course we can. Kia ora, thank you. And again, I'll just move that from the chair, can I? Okay. All in favour, yay? No? Thanks. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure I'll find out about it at lunch at some stage anyway. Yeah. But do I need to? Yeah, okay. Can I get a mover for the resolution? Thank you, Councillor Davies. Second, Councillor Ward. All those in favour? Aye, thank you. Against? No. Carried. So now we have the resolution to go into public excluded. I'm not quite sure why we've got that. Yeah.
Not going to public excluded.
What do you want to do?
It's your choice. You can either just take the minutes and then as is, but we've played around, we've had a little bit messy process and like this do it in the normal way. If we need to go in, just do them one after another.
Okay. Okay. Let's just do it and then we've done it. Okay. So anyone, Councillor Robinson, so can you go into the other link for the public excluded? Oh, no, it's not public, is it? So,
yeah, I'll do that.
Thank you. Good. And anyone who shouldn't be here, expiration, get out of tourism. And those are allowed to stay, of course. Thank you. Right, so can I have someone? Yes, please. Thanks, Gary. Thank you, Dale. Oh. Councillor Cromwell and Councillor Swiggs. All those in favour? Against? Great. Okay. November 2023, apologies for that. Well, I think we should have a game of cards and determine. I reckon we should be going north. Someone said, let's go north. Perhaps there could be a discussion later on with the deputy. So I now declare the meeting closed at 12:27. We will not be doing a karakia because we will, after lunch, we'll be moving into the attachment committee. Thank you for your time and patience. Kia ora.